Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we bring you the pedagogy, the practice, and the politics around public education. And, I never run out of material because that politics piece is really sort of dominating the news these days. I haven't had much chance to do much practice and pedagogy in the last few months because we've just had so much going on with COVID, with the legislative sessions being ongoing, and in Texas ongoing. We're in our third legislative special session. And so that means that they have chances to pass things that they didn't get passed in the first three attempts. So this particular news piece that I'm bringing is really rather relevant. It's controversial, but it's relevant, and it's something that we must get used to thinking about and at least keeping up with and seeing what the solutions are instead of totally rejecting the subject. Because a lot of us want to do that, and that is transgender students. Transgender students in K-12 is something that our legislators in several states are trying to moderate, to get a handle around, and it's not easy, folks. And so we're going to talk about why that is. Let's talk about what in Texas, which frankly mirrors a lot of other states that have similar politics. This is, very relevant news, and it's important that we all keep up with it because we all have sons, daughters, grandkids, nephews, nieces, and chances are we know somebody who's being impacted in the sports world by this. And I hope that we can keep it from being a negative thing and make it something that we understand is our developing world. Our developing world is changing, folks. It's just no longer mom and dad, dad working, mom staying at home raising the kids, and they lived happily ever after. That world, that scenario, although it still exists in some homes, is not the dominant family culture. And so we have, and most of us know, couples that are same-sex couples, two dads, two moms, they have kids, and that's just a part of our world. And so now we have kids who are being more open to discussing how they feel. For many hundreds of years, any talk of a child saying, I don't feel like a girl, I don't feel like a boy, was squished. It was squashed, right? But not in today's world. Today's world, our students are able and a bit more comfortable about talking about the fact that they may not feel like they were born into the right gender. And so because we now have a more inclusive culture, we now have kids who are identifying as the other gender or non-binary and non-gender, but let's stick to this subject. And they feel like they were born into the wrong gender, and they identify as the other gender. That being the case, then they want to compete and be treated as a male or female, depending on the gender that they're identifying with, which is ending up becoming a problem, especially a problem for many of our adults who have trouble sort of wrapping their brain around the fact that maybe the fact that we've had kids born into the wrong gender has been happening for generations, but we've just now allowed that voice out, and we are more accepting of kids and then eventually adults who identify as male or female, opposite of what they were born in. So in Texas, what Texas is trying to do is to say in K-12, Lawmakers will consider banning transgender students from playing in interscholastic teams that align with their gender identity, not their birth gender. Children in grades K through 12 would only be allowed to play sports that correspond to their sex assigned at birth or sex designation on their original birth certificate. And at least 30 states across the country have introduced similar bills on trans student athletes. And so far, 8 states, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Idaho, Mississippi, Tennessee, South Dakota, and West Virginia, have passed bills into laws or signed them as executive orders. Some groups in support of the bills, like the conservative Christian group Concerned Women for America, claim that trans girls have an unfair advantage. So, and that is something that is the struggle, right? We have seen young ladies who identify as females, were born females, identify as females, who have lost races and track meets and so forth out to a male that now identifies as female and is still having that same testosterone level and is still faster than a female at birth. So the issue is about basic fairness and opportunities that women have fought for centuries to obtain. The group said in a statement to ABC News, the disparity comes when forcing women to compete against a biological male that has an innate biological difference gives them a physical advantage that simply can't be erased. And so, that's the big argument right there. Other anti-trans bills on the special session docket in Texas includes bans on gender-affirming therapy, counseling, surgery, or healthcare, and in some cases allowing a child or teen under the age of 18 gender-affirming healthcare. That the thought is, by at least in Texas, that kids need to be old enough to be able to make that decision, and old enough is considered after 18. Now, in studying on this, I said, well, what happens when these kids reach adulthood, right? The Olympics and international competitions. And so I came upon something that I'm glad I read, because it just is adding to my knowledge base and understanding about how difficult this subject is, because there's just no clear-cut way of really defining what we should have for women, and so let me, this is, all right, the European endocrinologist. Let's see. So European Society of Endocrinology says setting fair regulations for top female athletes that have naturally higher testosterone levels. And this, I'm adding mud to the mix, but I think it's important that we all understand why this is so difficult to wrap our brains around, to come to decisive decisions around, and so forth. Top performing female athletes are more likely to have naturally occurring higher testosterone levels, which sporting regulations should take into account, according to findings presented at Lyon in the European Society of Endocrinology annual meeting in 2019. The researchers show that top female athletes are more likely to have higher testosterone levels and mild disorders, as well as more severe and rarer conditions that increase testosterone levels. These findings suggest that higher testosterone levels can enhance physical performance in women to levels more comparable to male physiology, and raises questions on how to ensure fairness of competition in women's sports. Elite athletic competitions have separate male and female events to maintain fairness, as men naturally have physical advantages in strength and speed and endurance. These characteristics are widely accepted to be due to men having a 15 to 20-fold greater levels of testosterone than children or women at any age. Recent regulations introduced by the International Association of Athletic Federation and the International Olympic Committee on the management of naturally high testosterone levels in women have been controversial. The new IAAF regulations allow women with testosterone levels in the male range to medically reduce them to be allowed to compete. However, the fairness and morality of these rules have been challenged by human rights and academic experts. The reasons for high testosterone levels in women are complex and may be caused by rare conditions such as having the male Y chromosome and male gonads. Studies in men show a clear relationship between testosterone levels and enhanced physical performance, but fewer studies have examined this relationship in women. So again, it's not a simple, clear understanding of if women have this level of testosterone, then they can compete as women, because we have and already have had women over the last probably 100 to 150 years who have beat out other women because they have higher testosterone levels naturally in their bodies. It is vital to establish to what extent higher levels of testosterone may be enhancing performance in female athletes towards a more male-like physiology and set an acceptable and fair testosterone level range for females to be allowed to compete. And just FYI, again, in researching this topic, I looked at the Olympics and transgender and came upon some information that I found interesting, and that is that chromosome testing actually started in 1968 Olympics. They tested for the Y chromosome to find males who they say were hiding as females. Now, some of you who are my age may remember that there were some German and Russian athletes back in 60s and 70s and maybe beyond who were very male-like. The females were very male-like, and so there was some question as to whether they were true females. And so there was the testing for the Y chromosome, and they may have inadvertently found some of the transgender women who were not trying to hide their femaleness, but were actually identifying as female, but born with the male Y chromosome and so forth. And so the last time that they tested for the Y chromosome was in the 1996 games. So I have to wonder if they now have something, they have other, DNA or something else. So this actually has been going on a little bit longer than just the last few years. We feel like it's the last few years, maybe 5 to 7 years, but even in 2016, the Olympic Committee was starting to make rules and regulations around transgender women, and they actually had some transgender women competing in this Olympics. So it's a topic that needs further study. It needs further understanding. And what I would encourage everyone to do is to be open to the information and not be that, nope, it was good enough for me, it's good enough for my parents, good enough for my grandparents, good enough for me. That we don't live in our parents' environment. We don't live in that world that our grandparents lived in. We live in a much more, dare I use the word, sophisticated society and inclusive society, where it may not be very many transgender students that grow up into transgender folks, but folks, these are the kids who have 3 times the suicide rate. They're more prone to depression, mental illness. And so is it okay to say 1% of our kids can live like that their whole lives and us not pay attention to them? No. If we can figure out a solution to be more inclusive, then let's keep making the attempt, right? So be open. I usually say be kind, but in a subject like this, be open to the information that's coming out. Be open to the new understandings that may be developing around this subject, and just inform yourself like I did around these um, studies, these behind the scene things that are happening as far as trying to figure out the right testosterone level for female athletes. And let me put it out there, will we ever find that? Would we find, if we studied male athletes, that all the males had about the similar level of testosterone? I'm going to say no. I'm no scientist, but I think I have an understanding of biology well enough to say I don't think that our males all have a short range of testosterone level. I think your better athletes probably have more testosterone than um, your athletes that don't make it to the Olympics. And a lot of it is some of it is supplemented by artificial means, which is why there's so much testing going on. And so it's really not just a female problem. It's it's making sure that we have a fairness level going on, right, in both male and female sports. But I hope I left you with a little bit more information, a little bit more pondering and reflection information. So because we did have a heavy subject the first half of our show, I thought I would bring a little bit of positivity to the last half. And that is, you remember how that post lockdown joy that we all felt. Do you remember how cool it was that we could start leaving our homes and we could start gathering in small groups, and the joy that we felt when we could finally hug a family member that we trusted because we were all within the same circle. And so we were just feeling so joyful. But now it's been long enough that many of us have sort of that joy has become more routine, and that's human nature. I mean, that's not a bad thing necessarily. That's human nature. And as things get routine, we take things for granted, and we might fall into that ho hum, the doldrums, if we don't make it a point to know how to keep the joy going. All right. So this is an article by Sumya Karlamangla. And if you can learn how to hold on to your post-lockdown joy by practicing gratitude, it's proven to make you happier. So let's see how we're going to do that. Let's see how we're going to be happier. As I mentioned before, all those things we got to do after practically a year of not being able to do, whether it was hug our loved ones that weren't living with us, whether it was going to a restaurant, going to school, all of those things has started becoming routine, right? This, for better or for worse, is human nature. We tend to adjust quickly to change, and with our happiness levels returning to baseline even after major setbacks or achievements. So this is Sonia Lyubomirsky, a psychologist professor at the University of California, has said, and it's key to our success as a species, this adapting thing, right? Adapting makes us resilient in the face of change and challenges such as divorce, injuries, and it keeps us striving for more after good things happen. But there's a way to replicate and keep going in that post-lockdown delight. And she says that's by practicing gratitude. And here's her advice. Once a day, stop and appreciate what you're able to do now that what you weren't able to do last year, right? You can make a mental note, tell your partner, text your friend, or write it down in a journal. But the method doesn't matter as long as you make a deliberate effort to acknowledge that things have improved. This is a version of what psychologists call savoring, appreciating small things around us to try to increase happiness. And I'll tell you, I'm really good at this. This is something I've done instinctively. It's just, I guess I'm my father's daughter. He was a saverer. Um, my mother, not so much, but that's probably why she married my dad, for balance, right? But I know many times I've turned to my husband when we're in a family moment, and I'll turn and I say, "Man, it doesn't get better than this. This is it just my cup runneth over." And I have been very blessed that I have been able to have um, lots of savoring moments in my really, and now 42 years of marriage this month. If you can believe that, my husband and I will have been married um, at next week, 42 years. So, and a good example of that is um, sitting down. How many of us have sat down and we wanted to complain about what this COVID year was, right? This third COVID year. But when we got together with friends or family and we were talking about last year, and all of a sudden we realized that even though this year hasn't been fantastic, in comparison, we're able to see how much better this year has been than last year. At least this year we could get out. We could have less spatial distancing. We didn't have to wear masks in a lot of cases. And so all of those things that we weren't able to do last year, that we had to do last year, we don't have to do this year in as many places anyway. And so you say, oh, I need to appreciate where we are, because I wanted to be bummed about this, gosh, this is crazy environment we live in with masks and vaccines being used as political footballs back and forth, especially around the public school arena. And yet, at least our kids are all in school, and at least our teachers are up and teaching and not having to do two things like virtual and in class at the same time. There's so many things around which to be grateful for. And so continuing to look for those moments is what we need to do. So, again, I'll have you stop and think, maybe write in the post something that you can think of that is so much better this year than last year. Just go ahead and write it in the post. And why should we do this? Why should we take a moment to savor every day, whether it's with our partner, our spouse, our best friend, write it down in a journal. Why should we do that? Well, because practicing gratitude is linked to fewer health problems and less depression, better sleep, and higher levels of happiness. Feeling thankful for little pleasures in our lives can add up to make us happier people overall. So months from now, we might not be able to feel quite as good as we did the first time we returned to a restaurant, or we're with relatives we hadn't seen for a year. But the pandemic can teach us how to find joy in small things that without it might have been overlooked. So how can we continue that work besides writing? If you need some deeper or more interested in going deeper in this subject, what you can do is you can look to an interesting course at Yale. Yale has had a course on happiness that they made available for free 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, before COVID, when they put it out for free, it had 150,000 or so users. But during the pandemic, it increased to 3.3 users who were seeking a way to stay happy. And so how did they do that? Well, first of all, it's a Psych 157, Psychology and the Good Life. And it's the science of well-being. So again, it's sleep patterns, keep gratitude journal, perform random acts of kindness, and taking notes over time of of little things that one is finding joy in and around. It says what you need to do is over time, you need to see if all of those practices that you're doing, it is having a general, if your mood is actually staying better over time than it would have had you not been doing these practices. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to do as far as your children is concerned, because I always want to make sure that we have a family opportunity to bond, is to hopefully you got back in the habit of eating dinner together and having that meal together at the end of the day and going around saying one good thing that happened today. What is one good thing that happened to you, or what's one good thing that you saw somebody do for somebody else, maybe you did for somebody else. And so being able to talk positively about the day, even if it wasn't a great day, one can always find something positive about it, and that sort of takes the bad out of it. And so how can we get our kids to make sure that they maybe keep a gratitude journal? Maybe they write 2 or 3 sentences before they go to bed. It's what is the routine? Bath, book, and bed, right? But if they add right there, the journal's on the table next to their bed, and we pick it up and you say, just write one thing, 2 or 3 sentences about what you're most grateful for today. And over time, I bet that would make wonderful reading for them and for yourself. So, that again, I'm not asking you just to do it with the kids, but it's proven that if adults do that, they become more grateful and happier over time. So as always, our time runs quickly when we have subjects that are a little bit controversial, or cause us to reflect a little bit, or there's a learning piece here, the learning piece around how to learn how to be happier over time. And so if any of this has caused you to think more, if any of this has caused you to maybe move to actually implement some of these strategies to learn how to keep joy alive after the pandemic, then the educator in my heart has done her job. So thank you, everyone, for being on. Any comments in the comment section would be appreciated. And even if you watch this over time and not live, I'll still get a notification that you took the time to write, and I'd appreciate it. All right, everyone, have a great Sunday.